and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Lee-Jiun in Seoul. Let's get started with a glimpse of today's highlights. As Korea struggles to shift from an economy dominated by conglomerates to one powered by smaller businesses, the country's new antitrust chief gets to work on chaebol reform. We'll sit down with an expert to talk about this. A growing number of young people in the farming sector are creating new opportunities to turn farming into a high value-added industry. These stories and more coming right up. With the world economy picking up, Korean companies are increasingly optimistic about third-quarter exports, propelled by the seemingly insatiable global appetite for products like semiconductors. Korea International Trade Association said a survey of 830 exporting companies shows their outlook index for Q3 was above 116 points, exceeding the benchmark 100 for the second straight quarter. While the first quarter's 93.6 painted a gloomy picture, the second quarter index rose to 106, exceeding 100 for the first time since the first quarter of last year, and signaling greater optimism over pessimism. In particular, exports of semiconductors, household goods, and machinery are all expected to rise compared to the April to June period, while steel continues to waver due to trade pressure from key import markets. Korea's big three shipbuilders remained at top rankings in total order backlog. According to a report released today by Clarkson Research for May, Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering ranked number one with 6.26 million compensated gross tons and unfulfilled orders. Hyundai Heavy Industries came in second with 3.33 million CGT, and Samsung Heavy Industries third at 3.2 million. Orders for ships this year continue to outpace last year, with figures from January to May totaling more than double 2016's amount for the same period. Korea also topped the list for 2 consecutive months in May in terms of fresh orders, receiving requests for 21 ships totaling 790,000 CGT. Now, more bad news for young job seekers. A fresh report from the OECD shows youth unemployment here in Korea saw the biggest rise among member countries. The government is looking to address this with a massive extra budget, but lawmakers are still at odds over the proposal. Our Elliot Kim reports.
The Moon Jae-in administration is just getting started on measures to address high unemployment in the country. All as the latest report from the OECD shows Korea's youth jobless rate has taken a turn for the worse, rising at the fastest pace among member countries. April data was bleak, with unemployment for those aged 15 to 24 climbing to 11.2%. Out of the 35 OECD member countries, Korea was one of 5 countries whose rate rose. While Korea's figure jumped 2.5 points since December, the other 4 countries had increases of only 0.2 to 0.3 percentage points. Conversely, the OECD average fell 0.5%. Korea's overall unemployment figures also increased in April from 3.5% to 4%. President Moon is treating this issue as a crisis, saying that if the problem is not handled in a timely manner, it could become a disaster of national proportion. Unemployment rates are at the highest since 2000, and the number of unemployed is at an all-time high. Statistics Korea reported a record high 22.9% real youth unemployment rate for May, which takes into account those preparing for recruitment as well as part-time employees seeking full employment. To combat this, a new bill that would spend nearly $10 billion to create jobs was submitted early this month. The government and ruling party hope it will get passed by the end of June. The bill outlines plans to create 110,000 jobs, but opposition parties have argued that it neither fits legal requirements nor will create quality jobs. With one party working to push the bill through and others fighting for change, what was initially seen as swift action may get bogged down in legislation. Elliot Kim, Business Daily.
A presidential committee will be launched in August devoted solely to fostering Korea's fourth industrial revolution, technologies like the Internet of Things and virtual reality. And here's how the president's de facto transition team described the committee.
The government's new committee will make efforts to boost the local economy by securing intelligent information technology, a key characteristic of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is expected to also revolutionize the way business is conducted.
The main body coordinating related plans for the next 5 years will be the Ministry of Science, ICT, and Future Planning. The ministry said the technologies of the Fourth Industrial Revolution are expected to generate business opportunities and profits worth $470 billion by 2030. Just yesterday, the new chairman of the Fair Trade Commission, Kim Sang-jo, laid out his plans to reform the country's family-run business empires, saying he'll meet with top executives and closely examine their business practices. Take a look.
Over the past 30 years, family-run conglomerates, also known as chaebol, stood at the center of Korea's rapid economic development. But now many economists say that Korea's conglomerates have become too powerful, and their dominance may be holding back the country from shifting gears to a more innovative economy powered by small and medium-sized businesses. They add that chaebol are now thriving to the detriment of other small players in the economy by hoarding profits, taking production outside of the country, and standing in the way of SME growth. Despite growing concerns that the Korean economy is too dependent on the success of chaebols, critics say that the government until now has been too afraid to take action against the conglomerates that account for a large portion of the country's GDP. But the new administration's antitrust chief Kim Sang-jo announced on Monday that he plans to meet with top chaebol executives as soon as this week to encourage change from within. So what kind of chaebol reforms can we expect from the Moon Jae-in administration, and what impact will this have on the Korean economy?
And to tell us more about this, Professor JunSok from the Catholic University of Korea joins us in the studio today. So good to see you.
Happy to be here.
All right, so Korea's new antitrust chief Kim Sang-jo seems more than ready to reform family-run conglomerates. Now, what can we make of his latest plans to meet with the chaebols?
Okay, well, I think he does have a very strong desire to change the Korean economy so that the chaebols are more market consistent. And I think that's in line with President Moon's promises that he made during his campaign. The problem with chaebol is not only economic, but it's also political. They have a lot of market power, so they can either help or stifle innovation, and they can either help or hurt the income distribution issues. I think the wide perception is that they've done more to discourage innovation and worsen income disparity. But also, there has been a lot of politically related problems with the chaebol in the last 2 years. Samsung Elliott and Choi Soon-sil being probably the most prominent. But also last year we had a lot of problems with Hanjin Shipping and Hyundai Shipping, which had very bad management for a long time. And under, say, a more Anglo-Saxon stockholder rights system, these bad management would have been kicked out a lot earlier. But because of the family-run chaebol system, they were perhaps, they remained in management for too long. And by the time that government had to come in and rescue, they were really nothing left that they could rescue. So I think that's part of the reason why chaebol reform has gotten a lot of light last year.
Now, what can we make of his plans on meeting with chaebols? I mean, do we have any details on that?
We don't really have a lot of details yet. He's going to meet with top 4 conglomerates, but it hasn't been decided whether he would meet with the family owners or whether he would meet with the presidents and vice presidents who are actually in charge of management on a day-to-day basis. And he hasn't really made it clear what he's going to talk about with them. Chances are he'll have to change some of the issues depending on who decides to meet. And he's also stated that he doesn't want to make this a regular thing. I think he's very afraid that there might be some regulatory capture that we've seen before, where the antitrust people who're supposed to regulate the chaebols actually become sort of partners to chaebols. So I think he wants to meet with the chaebols to give them ideas on what he's going to do, as well as try to take their point of view into account. But I think this is in more of a planning stage rather than actual implementation phase.
Now, I think it's fair for us to say that the past administrations were not so successful in chaebol reform. So what are the reasons for that?
Okay, I think just because the chaebols are such a big part of the economy, there were a mixture of fear that if they touch the chaebols in the wrong way, Korean growth will fall drastically, and recognition that they had to do something about the chaebol. Complicating the problem is also politics. Now, because chaebols are so powerful and they have such big economic power, most of the presidents in the past wanted to use the chaebols one way or another. The most obvious way is through bribes, getting them to pay either the president himself or his trusted friends and family. But even when the presidents were relatively honest, they wanted to use the chaebol's economic power to further their own policy goals. So they wanted to use chaebol's money to do some, say, projects that they would like. Even if those projects were made with good intentions, still they wanted to use the power of the chaebols. So that made reforming them a bit of a tough job.
Now, then, in your opinion, what approach will the new administration take in carrying out their chaebol reforms?
Okay, well, the chairman, Kim Sang-jo, had a press conference on Monday yesterday, and he pointed out two points. Two goals, but he didn't spell out much of the policy. His first goal, he said, was he wanted to restructure the FTC, but he needs approval from the Ministry of Interior and Ministry of Planning and Budget. He didn't exactly state why he wanted to restructure and how he's going to restructure, but the speculation is that he wants to form a large investigative team to look into chaebol's practices in the economy. The second point was that he wanted to split things into short-term, medium-term, long-term goals. Long-term goals, you're going to need changes in legislation. So he's first going on with the short-term goals. He hinted very strongly that he's interested in internal, inside dealings between the mother group and the subsidiaries. That has caused a lot of controversy in the past because, well, it shuts out a lot of independent small businesses. It also channels funds into certain subsidiaries, some of which are owned by children of the group chairman.
Right.
So they can use that money to get their own ownership of the group once their father passes away. And then it also stifles innovation somewhat because you're freezing out the innovative SMEs, and it causes opacity in accounting because, well, they sometimes pay more than they have to. So that's all those problems dealing with inside transactions. But also he said something that was very interesting. He said that the role of the FTC was to control market power, monopoly power, and deal with things like classic antitrust problems like price fixing, price distortions due to market power, and unfair use of market power. He said that from now on, the FTC will not deal with direct price controls like what they tried to do with prices for fried chicken in the chicken franchises. Okay. So I think that's good news. That means he wants to have the FTC more consistent with market economics and competitive economic environment. So I think that's actually the most important statement that he made yesterday.
But then there are also concerns that the government may be putting on too much pressure on family-owned conglomerates or chaebols alone under the banner of chaebol reform. So what are your thoughts on this?
Okay, well, in the short term, and I'm saying about in the next 5 to 10 years, chaebol is going to be crucial for Korean economic growth. There's no way out of it. Now, even though it may be harmful for innovation in the long run, because chaebols are so big and because they have global market recognition, any growth in the next few years will depend on chaebols. Having said that, though, I think the solution is to have market-consistent antitrust policies and competitive policies, competition policies, because that will allow new firms to grow, that will allow new innovation, and basically the chaebols, especially in the third generation of family ownership, haven't really been doing that much about innovation. Right. So having new blood, hopefully, will make Korean economy more dynamic. But in order to do that, you have to control the existing market power of the chaebols.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you.
The first day of official Brexit talks took place on Monday in Brussels, with the chief EU negotiator saying there would be substantial consequences for the UK. His British counterpart David Davis took the first punch, caving in to the EU's demand that a divorce settlement must be reached before any discussions on trade. Two agenda items the UK negotiator wanted to be done simultaneously. Despite the initial concession, Davis looked confident during a joint press conference, saying it's not when it starts, but how it finishes that matters. Three priorities were set by both sides, setting up working groups on EU citizens' rights, the size of Britain's divorce bill, and customs control between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. The two will meet every month for discussions, and Britain will exit the EU in March 2019 unless all member nations agree to extend negotiations. China is making headway with Myanmar on President Xi Jinping's Silk Road Economic Belt Initiative, committing $10 billion to an industrial project there. But its execution is stoking anger among locals, whose way of life is being pulled right from under their feet. Our Eunice Kim tells us more.
Myanmar's Kyakpyu Township is a mostly rural region along the country's western coast, home to some 400,000 people, most of whom subsist on farming and fishing. As plans for a special economic zone steam ahead, many locals are finding their way of living coming under threat.
The officials stop us when we go out fishing. We've been facing many difficulties since these big ships arrived. Our income has been reduced since then.
Those big ships carry Chinese crude oil to be pumped some 440 kilometers across Myanmar into southwest China, a part of Beijing's One Belt, One Road infrastructure investment plan that seeks to deepen economic ties with the rest of Asia and beyond. But it leaves 36-year-old fisherman Ye Yin and hundreds of others blocked from their trade. Many residents are raising concerns that the China-led $10 billion project is being rushed with insufficient regard to their way of life.
So the worry is that people will be displaced without proper compensation and without restoration of their livelihoods, and this will result in violations of their economic rights, their social rights and their cultural rights.
The Kyakpyu Special Economic Zone is one of 5 MOUs that Myanmar's State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi signed with China last month as she seeks a big economic win. Beijing has maintained it always seeks to uphold the principle of mutual benefit and cooperation in cross-border transactions.
You don't need to worry because China, when conducting international trade and business cooperation, is completely based on the spirit of equality, mutual benefits, and win-win cooperation with relevant countries.
Even as the main developer of the industrial project, China's state-run CITIC Group has promised to help develop the township and offer vocational training and development. Many hold deep suspicions that jobs will be limited to low-skilled work, paying inadequate wages under mostly Chinese managers. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
Korea's fruit price index hit a 4-year high last month. According to Statistics Korea on Tuesday, the index for May topped 118.15. Now, that's much higher than the base figure of 100 from 2015. The number is calculated based on the market price of more than a dozen popular fruits, including apples, grapes, and strawberries. Fruit prices have been soaring for the past 7 months due to a poor crop yield caused by last summer's scorching hot weather. Grape prices have risen 14%, and tangerines have doubled in price. The government says it plans to secure stocks in advance and put them on the market at discounted prices as a countermeasure. When agriculture meets the world of technology, producers are able to get more out of farming than ever before. At the heart of this revolution is young people who are changing the paradigm of farming here in Korea. Our Lee Ju-young has more.
The single biggest problem in Korea's farming industry may be its lack of manpower, with those aged 60 years or older taking up over 50% of the farming population in the country. Their annual income per household was only about 64% of their urban counterparts at around $33,000 last year. But as an increasing number of young people jump into the agricultural scene, the paradigm of Korea's farming industry is starting to change.
If more young people work in the farming sector, they can create new opportunities and potentially make a lot of money. Currently, the air quality and environmental pollution overall is quite bad. But if they can produce clean quality crops and customize them for consumers, farming can become a very high value adding industry. I think it's a good time for smart, talented, enthusiastic young people to enter the agricultural market.
36-year-old CEO Park Jong-bum had already worked in the agricultural industry for over 10 years before setting up his own crowdfunding company, Farming Fund. With the goal of building trust between farmers and consumers, it has already connected about 12,000 customers with 350 farmers around the nation. How it works is Farming Fund first selects a farmer, then editors develop content for consumers. Shoppers then invest in the produce, ultimately receiving fresher and cheaper goods in return. This also gives more freedom to farmers in how they operate, which may not have been possible under the conventional distribution system.
For farmers, their cash flow improves because they're able to receive the funding first. In the past, farmers would have to take out loans and pay it off later after selling their harvest. But now they're able to start with at least a part of the funding. They seem to be very satisfied in that respect.
Farming Fund says its end goal is to create a world where producers can harvest without worrying about debt and consumers don't need to worry about what they eat. A firm that shares the same goal is Mana CEA, an agricultural tech startup which delivers freshly harvested greens from its eco-friendly farms. Only it has its own approach.
The whole idea of farming is that people think that it's related for old people. It's a kind of a lower job. There's a general idea that it's not a very rewarding job. And we realize that that's not true. And then there's a lot of things that people can do that are really interesting in farming, especially for people at our age. So with a group of friends, we decided that we should make these technologies really available for people and getting more people to understand that farming is a very interesting enterprise.
The technology he's referring to is called aquaponics. Mana CEA says while there were some difficulties in finding the right formula in the beginning, aquaponics uses at least 90% less water and has boosted its production by about 1.5 times compared to traditional soil farming.
After feeding the fish waste is processed by bacteria, and that water is fed into these plants here. And the plant roots absorb all the chemicals that are not good for the fish, cleaning the water for them. That makes the whole cycle of water inside of an aquaponics system.
The whole idea is that farming doesn't have to be demanding and labor-intensive. Designed to significantly reduce labor, Mana CEA's very own smart farm technology is the backbone of this highly controlled environment. The startup says plans to commercialize its control solution are also in the pipeline to assist plantations in locations that are not very welcoming in terms of climate and even inside buildings. It has even caught the attention of Kakao's investment affiliate K-Cube Group, which acquired 33% of Mana CEA shares in 2015 as Kakao seeks next-generation growth engines. With the potential for farming seen as far-reaching, there are growing calls also for the government to create the right environment and provide ample financial support for young people looking to implement their ideas and build a greener future. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
And that wraps it up for today. But we'll be back tomorrow with more of the day's top business stories, so don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.